Hello everybody, my name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We got a good one for you. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We're giving you the latest on Rafah invasion as Israel continues its war on Gaza and a humanitarian nightmare looms, especially for those in those besieged Palestinian territories there. Also on the show, Stormy Daniels has testified today against Donald Trump. We'll do a quick recap of all things to do with that. She obviously received the $130,000 to keep silent about her account of having sex with Donald J. Trump. She provided jurors with the explicit details of the 2006 tryst, which he denies. We'll give you all those details. Also, an incredible story in Mondoweiss I want to read to you from Qasim Walid about what it's like to be a human shield used by the Israeli army. We've heard a lot about Palestinians using civilians, or Hamas using civilians as human shields. Well, we've seen a lot more evidence this conflict of Israel using Palestinians actually as human shields. And by the way, it's not a human shield if you just blow up the human shield anyway. And a really pretty crazy comment by the New York governor about black kids in the Bronx. We'll tell you all about that. It's Newsflash. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we are starting at the top with some of the latest here on the war on Gaza. And, it seems at the moment that we saw, just again, it didn't look like quite, the full-scale invasion. It looked like, kind of preparing the way for the full-scale invasion. And also, I think it critically, I think it is, as we, went over in pretty big detail last night, it was, it is true that Israeli troops have been on the ground. They have been rolling tanks through Rafah. They have taken control of the Rafah crossing. Now they're in complete control over what aid comes over the border. They were always kind of in control of that, as evidenced by the U.S. refusal to, compel them to let aid go through. And, Egypt saying, there is aid there, but, we are not really being allowed to let it go through. That's something that we have, kind of consistently seen. As really fears grow about a complete and total political calamity, a humanitarian nightmare. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says a ceasefire proposal, still falls far short, but a delegation has arrived in Cairo for further talks. Israel's seizure and closure of the Rafah crossing in Gaza is also raising, again, as we talked about just before, concerns about humanitarian aid. So we're going to start today's show by just giving you some of the key updates, starting with the White House and the Biden administration is hopeful that Israel and Hamas can close the remaining gaps in the ceasefire talks and a deal is reached soon. A close assessment of the two sides' positions suggests they should be able to close the remaining gaps, and we're going to do everything we can to support that process. And we know the text of the deal. It was pretty much essentially as we reported on the show for you last night, and I think it is something that it is hard to see Israel conceding or giving into any more concessions, but also I think it's very remaining to just given their posture, it seems like they will not accept anything that does not result in complete destruction of Hamas and killing enough men with guns. And again, that is the most charitable interpretation of their stance and what they're trying to do there. So they're not going to just say, oh, we got all the hostages back, that means the war is going to end. No, they need to in some way take apart Hamas, and that seems to be something that justifiably so Hamas is never going to accept. Again, even though they'll give back all the hostages in exchange for significant Palestinian prisoner exchanges, it really does seem like these people are pot committed to, quote unquote, again, this is kind of, I think, a euphemistic term, but wiping out Hamas, in whatever means they can. Meanwhile, we have the reports from Rafah at the moment, as heavy tank shelling in the evening of some areas of the eastern Rafah has been reported. They've gone crazy. Tanks are firing shells and smoke bombs over the skies. And by the way, I think it's, again, important to say that the Rafah incursion here it's not over. It's not like they just did, dropped a few bombs, rolled over a few, they have taken control of the Rafah crossing, which is something they have not told Egypt they're going to do. Told Egypt they were going to do. There's tanks of videos of tanks running over, the signs outside of that crossing. There's been, again, as we are reading right now, tons of eyewitness reports of tank shelling. Emad Judat says, I'm now seriously thinking of heading north, maybe to central Gaza area. If they move further into Rafah, it will be the mother of massacres. Tanks are firing shells and smoke bombs over the skies, and with the smoke over all Salam and Jaina neighborhoods, said Emad Judat, a Gaza City resident displaced in Rafah. About 1.4 million people have been crammed into tent cities and makeshift shelters and are suffering from shortages of food, water, medicine, and other essentials. Israel's military is conducting a limited operation in Rafah to kill Palestinian fighters and dismantle infrastructure used by Hamas. It says in order civilians to go to what it called expanded humanitarian zone, by the way, again, which they still have bombed multiple times throughout the course of this conflict, and has no human infrastructure, no running water, no electricity, no even latrines. It's just completely unprepared. There's just nothing there, to host these people, and especially 1.4 million people. It was an incredibly small zone. Meanwhile, the White House is hopeful. Again, as we talked about, the Hamas can close the remaining gaps, while assuring that the Rafah operations will be limited. The White House National Security spokesman John Kirby tells reporters that Israel has informed the U.S. that its operations in Rafah will be focused on blocking weapons and financial support from being smuggled into Gaza. This again comes as there has been a lot of strongly worded warnings about an invasion of Rafah that we kind of talked about that. We have touched on some of the conversations, but we've also again, for every big headline grabbing moment of Biden saying this is a real red line, we do not want Israeli forces going into Rafah under any circumstances. He asked, is there anything that you're going to do, anything that Israel could do that would get you to stop supporting them? He was like, of course not. What are you talking about? So it's definitely something to keep in perspective when we hear this kind of tough talk from the White House. It's going to be interesting to see how do you define a limited operation, and how a limited operation, what the definition of a limited operation gets spun and twisted. What number of civilians dead, what number of civilians dead would be a limited operation. How many apartment blocks blown up would be a limited operation? How many people forced to flee would be a limited operation? And it doesn't seem like, again, the limited operation is going to be starting anytime soon. Meanwhile, looking at some of these, negotiations that we really kind of, discussed last night, and it seems to be, somewhat ill-fated because Israel seems to be, intent on going into Rafah, whatever that means, with or without a deal. And it seems like there's nothing the U.S. seems to be prepared to do to stop them. Again, it's all very fluid. But Israeli negotiators have arrived in Cairo for talks on the truce. The instructions from Netanyahu, according to a statement shared by his office, say that they stand firm on the conditions necessary for the release of Israeli captives held in Gaza. And no word, really, for the moment, what that is. Because, again, we have seen so much kind of, shifting definitions here in terms of, things. First, it's either, for some, it's just Hamas and the hostages need to be destroyed. For some, I think probably more smartly so, they care about just getting the hostages back at any and all costs. So again, it's very, very, very interesting. It's very important to see. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden has used his speech on anti-Semitism to rally support for Israel in the wake of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Not 75 years later, but just 7.5 months later, after an assault by Hamas on southern Israel on October 7th, and people are already forgetting, they're already forgetting that Hamas unleashed this terror, and that it was Hamas that brutalized Israelis, and that it was Hamas that took and continues to hold the hostages. Biden said, I have not forgotten, nor have you, and we will not forget. So, again, just it's continued obstinance, it continued just unwillingness for Biden to be a leader on this to, do to something that, again, granted, no American president has done before, but again, with regards to Israel, no American president has been in this situation before, and actually stand up and say this was a conflict that went on before October 7th, 2023. It was already the most deadly year for Palestinians. That wasn't the middle of the war, middle of a war, in as far as records go back, especially in the West Bank. That was before October 7th, 2023. And to say, everything was hunky-dory before then is not only is it completely stupid, and it's completely, afactual. It's not a statement based in reality. It is also a recipe to keep this conflict going and to keep, violent groups surging on, both sides, because it's a refusal. Again, it's a refusal to live in reality. It's a refusal to say there is a reason why this happened in the first place. It was atrocities occurred. There is no doubt atrocities were committed by Hamas. Civilians were killed in the kibbutzes in the festival by Hamas. But to say this is an unprovoked, horrific attack by these, against these really good, these really perfect, it is not a statement that is true, based on any basic reading of history, and B, it is not a statement that is productive towards resolving this conflict in a sustainable way, which is what, Biden and the U.S. claim to want to do. Again, this has clouds of smoke, plumes of smoke coming over Rafah. There is some good news, and again, continued artillery shelling, with Biden apparently delaying bomb shipments to Israel in a very kind of unpublic way. And I think some of this power in his leverage here comes from the publicity of it. So I do think, I would kind of urge him to say, we are taking a stand on this. We need you to stop this assault into Rafah, whatever the case may be. He needs to come out, be bold, be confident about it, and actually make the case, not just even, because Americans are too small-minded to, really all sympathize with the Palestinians, but to go in, the American interest and say, we are, in the purely selfish interests of the American citizen. We are not helping ourselves by being engaged in this conflict in the Middle East, by putting our troops in harm's way to defend Israel's interests, and they don't care about us, and they don't care about our interests at all, so we don't need to continue to do this. I think that would be, it would be a very effective way of saying, here's why we should not support these people. Here's why they're not a good deal for us to make, that I think would get, a lot more traction with a broader group of Americans who are too, whatever, to not sympathize with what the Palestinians are going through in a very big way. But the U.S. media outlet Politico has reported that the Biden administration, which has enabled Israel's war in Gaza through massive weapons and funding transfers, is delaying the shipment of 2 kinds of precision bombs to try and pressure Israel. The story, which cites anonymous U.S. officials and 6 others familiar with the issue, was published as Israeli officials pledged to move forward with an assault on Rafah, an area of Gaza where it previously told hundreds of thousands of civilians to stay for their own safety. International organizations and foreign governments, including the U.S., have warned against attack on a tightly packed area, saying that it would be a humanitarian catastrophe. However, the Biden administration has given no indication it will cut off weapons supplies if the assault moves forward. So far, it's a delay on some types of weapons. Other weapons are still being shipped over, and it's no word on the timetable on that. How long they continue to delay? Why specifically they're delaying? And what is going to take them to maybe turn them back on, or hopefully never turn them back on again? But still, a very interesting and hopeful sign out of the government that, despite what Biden said about there's nothing we're going to do to not support Israel, whatever they do, that things, circumstances, events may have taken a bigger precedence here. So something to keep a very, very close eye on, just in general, with what is contrasting, here on the other side, as Yoav Gallant saying that there will be no compromise and the invasion into Rafah will deepen, if the captive deal fails. If that option is removed, we will go on and deepen the operation. This will happen all over the Strip, in the south, in the center, and the north. Hamas only understands force, so we will intensify our action, and the military pressure will result in us crushing the Hamas organization. The Times of Israel quoted him as saying, and it just seems pretty clear. A lot of people, Israeli associated people, are saying it's not going to be anytime soon, that Israel ends this war. So it's definitely going to be something to continue to focus on. with this really scary situation. We stand on the brink of what is is absolute humanitarian catastrophe, on top of what is already a humanitarian catastrophe with what's going on in Rafah. All right, before we go on to our next story, I just want to take this moment to make a quick announcement. If you are listening to this podcast pretty much on any podcast platform you can see, there is a link at the bottom to become a supporter of Newsflash. Some good reasons why you could become a supporter is it enables me to do, cooler things, to make more in-depth, high-quality podcast productions on all my podcasts, even though we're really only doing this for our most active podcast at the moment, which is Newsflash. Going to make some more exclusive episodes, some more fun episodes. We're going to break down various media pieces, have a little bit more fun, do a little bit more unserious stories, and it'll be a better way for me to connect with you, build a community, to talk about some of this stuff. And, I really don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is anybody out there doing the thing that Newsflash is doing, which is taking some of the most important stories in the world today, breaking them down from in a short, digestible, 30, 45-minute podcast that, processes these things from a journalistically based left-wing perspective, and hopefully helps you guys, process some of this with a little bit more sanity that you just put in on your podcast app and listen to wherever you are. So again, really thank you for doing so. And if you want to pay, I think it's three bucks a month at this point for some extra fun, please do. I'd love to have you. Love to get your comments and feedback about what you want to hear for some of those extra episodes. We have not started them yet, but once you're going to get kind of a critical mass of supporters, it'd be something that'd be really cool to do. Thank you very much. Anyway, it was a stormy day in New York City as Stormy Daniels took the stand to testify about, the stuff she did with Donald Trump, who is she's a porn star, or a former porn star, whose account of a tryst with Donald Trump after a golf tournament in 2006 led to the first criminal trial of an American president, which is so crazy. Of all the things that an American president could be criminally tried for, it's this. But it's also, kind of funny, too. You just have to sit back and laugh. So essentially, according to the New York Times, Joan Abramovich, Ben Protest, and Matthew Haig, Daniels, who was a porn star, received $130,000 from Trump's personal lawyer at the eve of the 2016 election in return for her silence. She described a sexual encounter that she said left her shaking and bewildered, that for Trump for years had denied ever happened, which is some pretty incredible stuff. This is all the stuff that we really have to detail here. So Daniels said in the tournament, she rode with Trump in the golf cart while he was playing, and he later asked her for her phone number and invited her to dinner. And again, this account, I think it's important to say, comes despite the objections of Trump's lawyers. Juan M. Merchant ruled that it would be up to the jurors to decide on the credibility of the porn actress, whose $130,000 hush money agreement with Trump is at the heart of the charges against him. Prosecutors said she would not, however, describe his genitalia as she did in her book, Full Disclosure. So, buy that book if you want to get an in-depth look on Trump's penis. Anyway. Yeah, so we got the celebrity golf tournament in Lake Tahoe in Nevada, rides in the golf court, and so she first described her interaction with Trump in a 2011 magazine interview. This has been kind of going on for quite a bit of time. The magazine Left in Style agreed her to pay $15,000 for the story, but she never collected because Trump's then fixer, Cohen, who is now expected to be one of the prosecution's primary witnesses, had the story killed before publication. The interview was eventually published in a related publication, In Touch Weekly, in early 2018, after the WSJ revealed her hush money deal. So a little bit of context there, again, from New York Times. So Trump and Daniels were photographed at the tournament together. She was 27, he was 60. He had married his third wife, Melania, the year before, and their son, Barron, was a few months old. That night, she had said, she has arrived at Trump's hotel penthouse suite in a gold dress and heels and found his bodyguard, Keith Schiller, standing outside. She went in and found him watching television on the couch in pajamas and slippers. Does Mr. Hefner know you stole his outfit? Daniel said as she joked, referring to the Playboy publisher Hugh Hefner. Daniel said they ate dinner in his room and talked, and he asked her about the porn business. He asked her to sign one of her movie DVDs and said she reminded him of his daughter. I remember, this is a classic, early Trump era throwback, this story. Then she says, he told her she should be on The Apprentice, the reality show. Ms. Daniels said she scoffed the idea that a porn star could be on the show, but he insisted he could make it happen. Trump lawyers said that they intend to argue that Trump's interactions with Daniels concerned only her possible appearance on that show. So then she went to the bathroom, Daniels had said, and she emerged and found him on his bed, and they had sex. Trump finished 62nd at that tournament, so I don't know how that compares to his previous performance. He got, maybe a little special, the Daniels bump. He and Daniels met on several occasions after that, and he continued to promise he would get her on the show, but they never had sex again, she has said. And, surprise, surprise, she was never on The Apprentice. So, yeah, kind of a classic story here, and it really is interesting how it, a throwback that really, I think, didn't help Trump at the time, and is not going to really help Trump in any way for it to be continuously brought up, again and again and again at nauseum as the election comes up, especially when he is kind of gagged from talking about it. It's not going to be very helpful in kind of smearing the judge and smearing everyone else involved. But it's going to be interesting to essentially see here how this entire case rests on, was the reason that Trump paid Daniels off, because he was embarrassed about his wife knowing, when his wife was just pregnant, just had a newborn baby at home. Was he trying to hide the information to protect her and the family, or was he trying to hide the information to help his election case? So that's essentially what this case is going to be decided on. So very interesting and very depraved stuff. That this man is one of the presidential candidates that we have, and the other one is somebody who is supporting and funding and arming genociders. So really some pretty bleak stuff. Okay, so this is a really incredible story. This is by Qassem Walid in a story from Ahmad Safi and his male family members in Khan Yunis. Surrounded by dozens of soldiers, tanks, armored cars, buzzing drones, and army dogs, Ahmad Safi found himself looking at a massive hole in the ground. Of all the death scenarios I imagined myself in since the beginning of the war, I never suspected I would see my own grave, the 26-year-old resident of Khan Yunis told Mondo Weiss. Ahmad and his male relatives had been detained by the Israeli army and forcibly conscripted to stand in front of a resistance military base as the Israeli soldiers took cover behind them. So this was a blatant use of human shields. So they took essentially all the male members of the family who they, according to their own military calculations, they essentially have, marked off as terrorists anyway, went up to this military base, put them outside, in front of the guns, and then started shooting over the heads of these detained Palestinians towards an area where they believed Hamas was. So Hamas, again, caught in this crossfire and essentially standing right over a big hole. So they wouldn't have to go far again for their own graves. On the night of January 22nd, the Israeli army launched a sudden attack on Western Khan Yunis, where 5 shelters for displaced people were located. In the middle of the night, Israeli troops advanced toward the Tibba buildings, where Ahmed and his family had taken refuge in the middle of the Israeli designated safe zone, which again was another reason 5012 why these safe zones should be completely discounted. These buildings were surrounded by Al-Aqsa University, the Al-Kahir Hospital, the Industrial College, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society Center, and the Al-Mawasi coastal area, all housing tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians. Earlier that night, Ahmed realized the Israeli quadcopter drones had fully occupied the sky. He knew what this meant based on his accumulated experience of Israeli war tactics. The army preferred to launch major operations under the cover of night. Ahmed heard nonstop gunfire in that distance that night, but was relatively far away, so he watched an anime show to distract himself. Moments later, the sound of gunfire intensified and got closer, and suddenly he heard screams from the opposite room. His cousin had been hit by a bullet. As the gunfire started intensifying further, Ahmed threw himself under his bed when the rest of his family rushed to his room carrying his injured cousin. That was when the Israeli soldiers stormed the apartment, bursting into the room in the blaze of flashlight. This is a family. This is someone who is sheltering in a designated safe zone, and this was for the first time he had seen an Israeli soldier in real life. Ahmed had told Mondo Weiss the army separated the women from the men, as we've seen countless times, and zip-tied men remain in the army's custody, and the women were forced to flee south to Rafah, which is, again, now being attacked. An Israeli commander ordered Ahmed and his family to, the men of his family to move downstairs in single file. He then ordered them to kneel against the southern wall inside their apartment, which faces a resistance military base. Ahmad's body was shaking uncontrollably. His lips were trembling and breathing heavy. His breathing was heavy. I tried to pull myself together, Ahmed recounted, but when I heard my mother say goodbye to us as she was dragged outside by the Israeli soldiers, I couldn't hold back my tears. And imagine, you're probably at that time, you're sure this is the last time you're seeing your mother again. You're zip-tied. You are, you're forced to, you're ordered then to kneel against the southern wall inside their apartment, which again faces this resistance military base. So essentially from there, the next morning on January the 23rd, the Israeli soldiers ordered Ahmad, his father, his brother, and the rest of his cousins to move outdoors and instructed them to move horizontally in front of the armored military cars. As they ordered us to stop and stand still, I found myself again a few meters away from the resistance military base. That was the moment I realized we were being used as human shields. Soldiers forced them to kneel in the middle of the street as they took cover behind Ahmad and his male relatives. They were forced to wear thin clothes in the winter cold, so their hands were zip-tied so tightly they couldn't feel their fingers. Their soldiers at several points fired bullets next to their feet in an effort to terrorize them, perhaps to make them more amenable to following orders. Every time, and so Ahmed's facing front, so we had to check back as the soldiers were giggling to see if his family was still alive. At other times, a tank would rapidly move towards them and then drift back less than a meter away from them, Ahmad realizing the soldiers were toying with them. So again, just people who take joy in other people's terror. We've seen that time and time again. He kicked him in the genitals like they were hitting a football, according to Saeed. This was Saeed's brother. They beat him so severely that he blacked out at one point. This is Ahmad's brother, They suspected him of being a resistance fighter because of how he looked. For Israeli soldiers, any man with a beard who has the mark of sujud on his forehead is a Hamas member, Ahmad explains. Many devout Muslims who touch their foreheads to the ground when kneeling in prostration during prayer will develop marks on their forehead from repeated friction with the prayer rug. Moments later, an intensified exchange of gunfire broke out while Ahmad and his family were in between the Israeli soldiers and the resistance fighters with no shelter. So they stretched their bodies on the ground in a helpless attempt to take cover. We kept screaming in Arabic, "Stop shooting, stop shooting," said one of Ahmad's cousins, Ammar, and they eventually stopped. They were forced to remain there for over 12 hours, conscripted by the Israeli soldiers as unwilling human shields. By the end of it, they were dehydrated and could barely stand on their feet. At noon, in a moment of lax surveillance, Ahmad decided to perform the noon prayer with his eyes, a method that is allowed in Islam when a person is paralyzed or dying. In Ahmad's situation, he thought both cases applied. Before sunset, the exchange of gunfire broke out again. 3 Israeli soldiers rushed towards Ahmad and the rest of the men and pulled them toward a large sand dune, which they forced them to stand upon, so they were visible and exposed to the line of fire. As they stood on top of the dune, they looked down, and on the other side, there was a large ditch in the sand underfoot. The soldiers forced them to stand there on the dune, exposed to the line of fire, with a ditch looming below. My cousin Ammar told us to cling to each other's fingers and cross our feet so that a bullet hit one of us, he wouldn't fall into the mass grave, Ahmad told Manda Weiss. The image of civilians being buried alive ran through their minds, exactly what they had heard happened in the Indonesian hospital in November 2003. This was also well before news broke in April of this year of massacres and mass graves that had been uncovered in Al-Shifa and Nasser Hospital, revealing hundreds of corpses. After the exchange of fire was over, the Israeli soldiers forced Ahmad and the rest of the men inside a building. The building was all dark except for the room Ahmad and his family were forced into. The southern and eastern walls of the room were destroyed, which made those inside visible to anyone in sight from the resistance base. Every once in a while, a soldier would come and point a red laser towards them for a few minutes, then go away. I think he was trying to make it clear to the resistance fighters that we were also inside the building, as they were using us once again as human shields. Again, it's so ridiculous to hear all this stuff when we have seen about it's such a shame that Hamas used Hamas used Palestinians as human shields. It's disgusting. They embed themselves in the civilian population. But again, we see really here Israelis coming in invading a place that they thought would be a safe zone, was told to be a safe zone, and they are then using Palestinians as human shields. It could not be more clear, and it just could not be more blatant and outrageous. Anyway, with that being said, let's go on to our final story of the day, and this is a bit of a complete shift. Kathy Hochul had some pretty interesting thoughts. She's the governor of New York, and she said she regrets making an offhand comment that suggests that black children in the Bronx do not even know what the word computer means. Hochul is a Democrat and made the extemporaneous comment on Monday while being interviewed at a large business conference in California to discuss expanding economic opportunities in artificial intelligence for low-income communities. Right now, we have young black kids growing up in the Bronx who don't even know what the word computer is. They don't know. They don't know these things, Hochul said while on stage at the Milken Institute Global Conference. The remark was not addressed during the interview, and the governor went on to explain that her goal is to provide avenues for communities of color to access emerging artificial intelligence technologies as a means to address social inequality. Still, the comment drew some pretty immediate criticism from some political leaders in the Bronx, especially including Assemblywoman Amanda Septimo, a Bronx Democrat, who said the remark was harmful, deeply misinformed, and genuinely appalling. In a statement later Monday, Hochul said, "I misspoke and I regret it." She said, of course, the black children in the Bronx know what computers are. The problem is they often lack access to the technology needed to get on track to high-paying jobs in emerging industries like AI. That's why I've been focusing on increasing economic opportunities since day one of my administration and will continue to fight to ensure that every New Yorker has a good paying job. While the governor's words are inartful and hurtful, this is Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie. I don't believe that is where her heart is. He said, "I firmly believe she wants to see all of our students excel." And, it's probably, in some sense true. I mean, honestly, I don't think she really cares that much what happens to black kids in the Bronx and, her budgets and her priorities and her conduct as a pretty, conservative, less effective version almost of Andrew Cuomo, less politically, I guess, thuggish version of Andrew Cuomo in terms of her reactionary policies. It's pretty clear, she doesn't care about any of that. So, but I do think, I think the weird thing is she just has, again, probably a very weird idea of the black kids in the Bronx and their, intellect, I guess you could say, with regards to, computers and all that stuff. And it doesn't, again, is also not really doing anything very serious about funding any opportunity for these people. It's a very kind of weird plot. These poor black kids in the Bronx, they don't even know what computers are, so let's just cut all their public school. But it's like, it's this kind of quintessential image of out of touch white, quote unquote, liberalism and like looking out for the, the little guy with these, I'm so concerned comments that, also, do tend to end up being incredibly tone deaf. It's a very similar example to that famous clip on The View where they're talking about who's going to clean your toilets, Donald Trump.
There are a lot of Latinos here in this country that do agree that the immigration problem is a problem and it does need to be addressed and it does need to be fixed.
Interesting.
But making those comments, those racist comments, do not help.
And if you kick every Latino out of this country, then who is going to be cleaning your toilet, Donald Trump?
Oh, that's no.
In the sense that,
no.
You know what I mean? Like, when I'm saying that
there's more jobs to be
in LA, they always...
But they don't. Latinos are not only the only people
I didn't mean it like that. Come on. No, I would...
that clip just makes me cringe and laugh in equal measure every time. Like, if that's not, that's of the same genre there from Kathy Hochul, who, again, she had a lot of other, much greater problems than that, but, a very typical New York Democrat type approach to, supposedly making life better for the poor black kids in the Bronx. All right. With that being said, hope everybody has a great day. We will be back tomorrow. I promise. This News Flash. Thank you so much. And please do consider becoming a supporter of the show. Thank you.